Hello, everyone. So we are going to have a relatively packed meeting today, and we do have a hard stop at the very latest at 9:50 because there'll be an OpenChain board meeting immediately after this call. For that reason, I'm going to dive right in. The first thing is to show you our antitrust policy notice. We are, as always, operating this call and this meeting under the Linux Foundation antitrust policy. The full policy is on our website, and you can access it there. If you're from a Linux Foundation member company, you can contact our counsel, Andy Updegrove, with any questions. Now, our regular agenda has been compressed today because we are on that time limit, and I will also, in a rather unusual move, skip over our introductions, except to say that for those of you who have been here before, most welcome. And if any of you are new, well, hello there, and I hope you have a great time in our meeting. There is a lot of specification news from the OpenChain project. The end of last year saw some really great stuff happening around our security standard. We had certifiers like Puno Veritas, CAICT, and PwC announce support for the standard and that they are providing services throughout this month. That type of support has continued with, for example, Bitsy announcing customer support. Equally important, or perhaps even more important, we are seeing market adoption of the standard. So, for instance, we have seen in January, BlackBerry announce whole entity adoption of the security assurance standard, the specification 1.1, our de facto standard. This is the second standard of ours that they've adopted as a whole entity. They adopted our ISO standard for license compliance earlier, and as such, they've set something of a record around the world. We've also seen an announcement from Interneuron regarding adoption of the security assurance specification. All of this is very promising, and it indicates the type of momentum we're seeing ahead of the security assurance spec becoming an ISO standard. We expect that to happen around the middle of this year. And in the meantime, of course, as people adopt the de facto version of the specification, they are in a position to automatically be conformant with the ISO standard when it launches. And speaking of adoption of the standards and conformance, we have another third-party certifier in our ecosystem. TÜV with their Taiwan office, have just been announced as an official partner. We have two more certifiers being announced in the next week. So a lot happening in terms of the type of organizations providing third-party certification. We've also seen some interesting news around the reference material we produce. We talked with LF Training, and our online training courses are doing pretty well. Our first course, the Introduction to Open Source License Compliance Management, has had over 1,200 enrollments, and we've had almost 400 completion badges issued. What's most interesting, perhaps, is the rating of the course is very high, 4.65 out of 5. LFC 194, a much newer course, has already had almost 580 enrollments and almost 140 badges issued. Again, a very high score with 4.55 out of 5. This puts our courses into some of the highest rated course categories from LF Training. Now, I mentioned this because there's been some great news regarding market specifics around the use of these courses. Continental has made LFC 193 a required course for software developers from Q3 last year, and Bosch has been asking suppliers to use LFC 193 and requires external developers to use LFC 193 since Q4 2021. So that's a very exciting, and it's all indicative of the fact that our execution in market looks solid. We're seeing adoption of the standards. We're seeing plenty of momentum regarding third-party support, and we're seeing our reference material go out there nicely. In terms of new news, I just wanted to flag that in a few hours, there will be a formal announcement that our latest automation case study, a webinar is out, and this is something that we recorded a few hours ago. You might have joined us live earlier in the day. This particular case study goes into a very important initiative, providing an open source and freely accessible way to do the type of vulnerability analysis that previously was far more difficult to access. So that's very exciting. Now, in terms of external news we're covering this week, we're going to be looking at SBOM news only. Again, as I said, we're on a tight schedule, so I just want to dive into the meat, editing our specifications. Kate over at the SPDX project sent some news. They had SBOM dev room at the FOSDEM event in Europe, which has just concluded. Apparently, it went really well. There were presentations from Fossology and SW360 and discussions around things like using SPDX for safety. What is interesting is that the presentations will be posted over the next couple of weeks. So even if you weren't in Europe and you couldn't be at that room, you will be able to catch up on some of the key material. There is also a discussion underway how definitions being worked on will be addressed by CISA. There's a white paper linked in these slides. Don't worry, you are getting a copy of the slides by email. So this is something to keep track of, discussion of different type of SBOMs, and you can do that over at the SPDX project. Now, on this call, we are moving from the news section into the doing section, where we work on the standards and core material. We have our co-chairs of the specification work group on the line. We've got Chris Wood and Helio. Helio is here for the first 30 minutes, so he'll be here for about 20 more. And I will, if possible, hand over to Chris and Helio, hey there, to lead the discussion in just a minute. The only item before I formally hand over to my handsome colleague in Europe and my equally handsome colleague in North America is just a note that we are at the closing point for something we discussed earlier and had no contention. On the last call, we discussed a mismatch between the licensing and security specs, where the security spec had, I must say probably somewhat accidentally, a different definition of open source than the security spec. So licensing and security had a mismatch. It was proposed to harmonize the language by ensuring that both referenced the open source definition and free software definition and included the note or similar license. The ISO standard includes the note or similar license, and the security spec didn't. So the resolution here, as proposed, was we just add or similar license to the security spec. The timing for comments was until this call, and no comments came in. Therefore, I propose that we do as we flagged and close that issue with the security spec aligning with licensing. Helio and Chris, do you have any concern or comment about proceeding as previously discussed?
Not at all. Chris?
No. Go ahead.
All right. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Helio. Let's consider that done. I'll update GitHub, and I will hand over to you for the next thing, which is some of the comments that came in from ISO via ISO Working Group Subcommittee 27, ICT Security. This is specifically for the security spec, but of course it has ramifications for both specifications in potential because we try to keep them aligned. And if there's any cross pollination on the security and licensing topic, something fundamental, that would change both specs. So this item, I'll hand over to Helio and Chris for this. Helio, I don't know if you want to or not, but you should be able to screen share if you want to mess around on GitHub. The same applies to you, Chris. And I've put this slide up for now, just covering the topic. I'll mute myself, but just call me in if you need me.
I think the slides will be okay because it will reflect what is there. So in the general, that's what I see. That's I pretty much have an opinion about this one. Yes, and omitting this made this the whole specification too more broad in the sense that we cannot tell to everyone and it is okay to have mitigations, it's okay to have remediations and or not. We never say anything. It means that we are not pushing anyone to having this really happening in the situation that okay, we have this specification and the decision comes from the people that is deploying the software itself, but not us telling them what to do. But on the other side, it's made open for interpretation. We don't specifically mention this kind of things. I pretty much agree with the second idea of this, and we should avoid to put in there because sometimes there's a disagreement between how the people doing it, how the legal teams doing the assessments of this kind of these definitions there, and then we are doing this in the specification means it orient people to think in a one single way and not it's not legally bounded at sometimes. What do you think about this?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I believe those are both good definitions, and the fact that they're not currently represented in the specification as it's in for review, I think that originally both of those terms were used in the specification somewhere. They must have gotten removed because usually remediation and mitigation occur in the same general paragraphs. So I would say that if it doesn't hurt anything and it's not contrary to the way that ISO wants to see the specifications, that we leave them in there for future updates, because we'll definitely use those words.
That's correct, but then we asking about in the end in this question it says that asking about if this was mitigated or remediated. Maybe if you change in the wording to say that the situation of a vulnerability has two possible immediate actions that could be mitigation or remediation, but it's not necessarily asking that is done or not. This should be decided and relevated by the team or the assessment team from the company that's going from there. We should not say that every time it's asking this on the ISO. Maybe it's good to say the definitions there. Maybe good to say that why it is this could be relevated, but not asking about this officially that is mitigated or remediated. At some point, we are forcing everyone that's using the ISO to do this, and we are not supposed to force anyone to do these things. We give the possibility to understand what we do it, but not forcing to do it.
Well, I agree. They should be recommendations.
Yeah.
When we pose them in the spec, I don't think in the definitions that the definition would mandate somebody to use it. It's just the definition. So if they see the word, they can tell what the difference is between the two.
Yeah. So I would say that it's okay to add the definitions and we're changing the word not for the has the vulnerability being mitigated, but possible actions if a vulnerability is found. And then we open the choice and to everyone to see the remediation and mitigate or how they apply on your business there, but we explain these possible actions that existing.
I suppose we can also, oh, sorry, Chris, go ahead. My apologies.
No, that's okay. I think that remediation is the ultimate goal of what you would want to do with the vulnerability. But if you can't do that, then you should be able to at least mitigate the risk and explain how it's mitigated within your company structure to your customer, because the customer they're getting SBOMs are going to ask what you did. And then they're going to ask why you didn't remediate it instead of mitigating it. And I think that's where I'm not sure if we're totally connecting on this, Shane.
Well, I think I get where you're coming from, and I can see how, adding these definitions and just making sure we are cautious about making sure that we don't mandate people into a corner, that they have their flexibility. It seems to all make sense. But you know what? Let's throw it open to the room as well. We've got quite a few people here. Does anyone have any comments or thoughts about this? Don't be shy. You can unmute yourself and talk, or you can use the chat if you prefer. If there are no comments at this juncture, it does sound, if I'm right, Chris and Helio, that the basic thing coming out of here is that adding definitions for what remediation and what mitigation is doesn't sound like it would be an issue for the spec. Is that a good takeaway?
Yeah, Stefan has a question there on the chat. So if the remediation appears in document, mitigation does not, and should the words be defined if not use it? I think the both ones should appear in the document, and you should define those ones, because when the isolated itself doesn't make sense as a remediation there. And then because mitigation is a reality. Let's see, like the Linux blades or something similar, that we really do mitigations. So remediation itself alone cannot make sense on the specification, or this otherwise, Stefan, in this case, or you would remove remediation or you add mitigation as well, and both two as recommendations to be and analyze it, but not as question. This is mandate. That's what I think about.
Yeah, so we could, because the word remediate is used in the specification as submitted, we could add the definition for remediate and save the definition for mitigation for future work. Mm-hmm. If that might be more acceptable.
And I think we're in a position, definitely, as we look to the future work, if we have cited remediation, to also point out the option of mitigation and have that definition. So it does seem perfectly doable to me to add to the next gen of the spec.
Yeah, I think so. I think just make a note to address that, because it probably should be a recommendation in the specification where it talks about remediation, to also say, and if you can't remediate it completely, then at least explain how you're mitigating it so that the customer doesn't need to worry about it when they're reading the SBOM.
That's a good point.
Because we've got to remember that these are really a holistic set of processes that are kind of co-joined between licensing and vulnerability because they all occur during this continuous build and integration and delivery systems that are being set in a lot of places now. So you can't, I think it would be good to give them an alternative of if you can't remediate it, then here's how you'd mitigate it and explain it. And then it would come out in the SBOM when you run the SBOM. Does that make sense?
Yes, it do. And then I want to put something that we need to clear thinking about. We do need this definition because this specification is associated to actually security vulnerability, but is not treat directly of security vulnerability because it's there. It's the security part that is the duty of solving this. But in the end, we need to actually mention this because it's correlated to the compliance method there. So we explain that why we need to care about this one. This need to be directly connected to the security people managing this one, but we are related to the compliance part of vulnerability part. It's not our part to mitigate or remediate, but actually inform if the security part is doing this there. So that's why we need at least mention on there, could be included on the related for future SBOMs there, but be clear that we are not the ones that are doing this one. This specification is not supposed to be the one that will fix the vulnerability or mitigate it or remediate it. This is be done for someone else in that different area. We're just the ones that need to inform that. So that's why we need to change a little bit the language, but we need to at least inform about why.
So when we are tweaking the specific language, this is going to be section 332. So it sounds like basic. Sorry, go ahead.
Yep, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say it's section 332. So it sounds like the GitHub issue should be just updated to note that we should have a definition of remediation and mitigation. And we should look at, when citing remediation, to also cite mitigation. And that doesn't mean that we don't want people to remediate. Of course we do. But as Helio, you pointed out, mitigation is a market reality, so we can't skip over it. So it sounds like that's the nuts and bolts of what we need to do here in the next step with this issue. Is that okay as a summary?
Yes, it's correct.
Okay. I'm just updating GitHub. Oh, hi, Mary, over to you.
I have a thought here. When I read this sentence, the important fact is, has the vulnerability been mitigated or remediated? Then we define this 2.6, 2.7. What is remediate? What is mitigate? I'm thinking the remediate is a method for mitigated or eliminated. So my question or my thought is, if we change this, the first sentence, the important fact is, has the vulnerability been mitigated or eliminated? Then we define what is mitigated, what is eliminated. The remediation is a way how to do that. So either you reduce this kind of vulnerability or you remove it. So that is mitigated or eliminated. I don't know if I make this even more complicated.
Yeah, but in the end, it's our obligation on the specification is that we need to tell about the software has vulnerabilities and if it was mitigated and was remediated, and not about asking if there is, just to inform. So this is actually what need to appear on the SBOM. And then the question that who will actually provide this information is not, and then we put in, and then this is like the ones that provide the information is the ones that we fulfill this one, and you need to provide this information. So that's one is not need to be as agree with change, would move it below there, because then it's a necessary part that you need to inform about, but it's not the one that you will provide by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you're not working in cybersecurity and you're not familiar with how you remediate or mitigate risks, it's kind of difficult to explain that, because in reality, when you're building the software and you run the scans on it and you find that it's got a vulnerability in it, then you need to do research on the vulnerability and see if it's a known exploit or not, and then see under what conditions it would affect the software that it's in. And then you need to look at it in a larger standpoint and see, does your software that component is in, does it actually use that capacity? Because if it doesn't, and there is no remediation developed yet for that problem, then you can mitigate it by simply saying our software does not use SQL in any way. So therefore, SQL injection is not a possibility with this vulnerability remaining in the software. And it can be remediated later when a fix is actually established.
Let's say I use a tool to scan my source code. I get this security report. There's a red mark there. Okay, this is, let's say, the vulnerability and blah, blah for this version of the open source. The remediate can be like, okay, you need to use the latest version that is safe, for example. So if you use the latest version,
you are correct.
you will,
but you are not informing that, because you get information from elsewhere. So we need to actually inform it that was mitigated, not mitigated, or remediated, but you are not the one that actually scanned it and made this information. We get from somewhere else, and that's exactly the one that separate these ones. Yes, we do scanning, and we ask it someone else the information that is mitigated or not, and then we add it in the response. Then this is, so it's okay. The information will exist because you ask it, and it need to be mentioned on the response. So in the terms that we need at least explain the terms about remediation and mitigation, but we are not the ones actually doing this specific things. So we say these terms could appear on the response, but it's not us that producing it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Some really good discussion on this topic, I think, and indicating here that our increased definitions and adding some text into section 332 regarding mitigation might be useful. So I've added this to GitHub. It's under the open issue that was cited on this slide, so that we can essentially formulate the expanded language for 332 while adding in the definitions that seem uncontroversial as well for the next generation of the specification. Do you, Helio and Chris, do you want to jump to the next item if no one else has a comment right now?
I just have one. Yeah, this is Prasad. Sorry, I just had one thought. I think, again, this is just keeping in mind that, yes, it does say at a very generic level that, okay, there is a known vulnerability. Do we need to make a comment on any of those reference points where, such vulnerability information, like, for example, there are certain external databases, right? When it comes to National Vulnerability Database, NVD is one source that, usually folks tend to look at. There are similar such external sources. Should we need to make at least a mention of saying, okay, when we say known vulnerabilities, is this something that is out there somewhere? Is there a common reference point, or maybe a set of repositories that we need to look at? Should that need to be specified here?
I don't think so, because we're talking about a generic specification. So we cannot dictate the one source of information at some point. It means that maybe you have a huge company, and this huge company has this completely entire department that is do it, or maybe you are just a small startup and you can rely on information that is actually public in general. So we cannot simply mention things.
Yeah, no, I'm not advocating for, patronizing one source or another. I mean, I'm just trying to say that, when we say known vulnerabilities, what exactly that mean, right? Who knows that? Where is that known?
What could be interesting is that we can add in the specification that the produced document has a field that can provide the information based on who produces documents. So if the company decided that this information is coming from this point, they could decide to put in the document as there, but not the specification itself says that they can provide the source that they want and they use it, but we are not offering any specific source on this. This could be okay.
So you are saying that the source itself can be essentially decided by the organization. We don't necessarily have to do it, but it's up to them to define that source.
Exactly. And then maybe this, depending on how you see the point of view, this can even be mandatory. Like if you're really adding information about mitigation and remediation, you need to inform the source, even if it's internal one, because otherwise how you can actually rely on this information? What is the trust fund there? So this is two ways to see this point here.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
All right. Okay. If there's time to do another issue or part of one, I suggest we just have a look at that, though I know that, Helio, you might have to drop off soon. But
yes. I'm given another 8 minutes, so it's fine to do it.
Okay. Well, this is just about under the competence category of the spec requirements, asking to implement other ISO standards. Now, that can be slightly controversial if we cite the standards, because we've avoided citing standards in the spec. But adding requirements that would align us with those ISO standards does sound like a juicy topic. And that's why I wanted to throw it over to you about what do you think of those requirements?
That's and the thing is that it provides a timeline. Its minimum requirement time is the organization decision, or we should do a minimum idea of there. It's pretty much open of this case of at least the topic 3. 1 and 2 makes sense, because then we just even connected to the previous question in 1, and the implement capability of secure distribution is pretty much logical. That is okay. But the 3 is like we cannot simply tell about the timeline for anyone there. It's like this is not enforcement when we go in there. So this is, for me, is completely out of the scope for the 3. The 1 and 2, it makes completely sense. And nobody has a comment on that.
Well, I'm guessing Chris might have some ideas based on his domain experience here. I would just make. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I really think that this is out of scope for what we're doing right at the moment. For future work, maybe. I think we're going to start getting a little complicated when we start doing, if we were just to throw these in under competence category, because you need to build on the competence, and I'm afraid that it's going to start scaring some of the smaller organizations off. Whereas Helio was just talking a minute ago, there are very large corporations and companies like my own, for example, where we've got a whole department of people who are chartered with doing this kind of work, and to put it into a security specification that can fit all levels, I think that this is probably a little steep for them to say, oh, well, maybe we're not going to adopt it if we have to do this right off the bat. I think we should.
I think. Yeah,
okay, go ahead.
I think it
so
should.
Based on the artist's comment, I think he was mostly right on these things. And together with Chris, we need to review how this is connection with different kinds of ISOs when people don't have directly open access to this one. And then we should push for evaluation for next instance, but not right now. I pretty much agree with the idea and Chris on this point. So this is a pretty much good ideas, but my point of view, we should go ahead after this vector to understand this better. I vote in favor of what Chris is saying there. We are going too much.
And I suppose adjacent to this, and this is something, Chris, that you really highlighted in a clear way, this is expanding what this spec would do. And there's no reason that people couldn't use this spec and then look at the other ISO specs and use their expanded terms to increase their security capability. There's no particular reason we have to expand to implement other ISO standards. People can progress from our standard to another one organically.
And in a joke side, we'll be violating our own policy of keeping everything open, right?
Because both of those ISO standards are not freely available.
Not
That's
open.
A good point.
Exactly. Well. Yeah. So to be evaluated for the future.
Yes. But if we didn't cite the standards themselves, we just added the requirements that would align with those standards. Even if we didn't cite the standards as a requirement, we just added new requirements to our standard. It does seem it might be adding a bit much. Like 0.1 makes sense, but it does mean that you become a report gathering entity, which would be a heavy lift for some orgs. Having secure distribution of software updates is a perfectly sensible security requirement. But again, our spec is currently scoped to dealing with known vulnerabilities as opposed to larger security action.
Yeah, I will add something on this. It clearly looks like something that the governments will at some point enforce for companies, or maybe in general acceptable in the future. There's both 3 points in general there. It's like I can see things like European Union deciding of this in the way they decided for UNC 155. So you keep open to this becoming an appendix for the future revisions right now, but not in this current state.
Yep. Okay. So, sorry, Chris, go ahead. My apologies.
No, I said I would agree with what Helio just said.
In that case, it sounds like this one is a nope. We'll come back to it later.
I think I still have one more that I can smash my time a little bit before people throw me out of office.
Okay. The last one is the easiest. It's actually referring to the ISO standards we just saw, and it's saying add references to these ISO standards. And
it's just the same.
Yeah.
As long as that is not open, yeah.
Well, We don't have a strict rule about mentioning something, but I just wanted to put a context here. We mentioned SBOM.
Shane, wait. Let me just be clear on this point. We are given to the open specification for everyone, and then someone will come to us, will criticize because we're referring for a material that is non-free for a thing that we declare that's free. So that's even we don't have this policy. It's in a public way to see these things. It's hard to assume that, okay, sorry for that, and we publish these things. We cannot do that. It's like unless we specify this policy that doesn't exist yet, that is okay to push everything that is not open, references that is not open. That's fine, but in the public view of this point, yes, we are referencing non-public things in the public documents and how people can access there. That's we are limiting then our audience.
A valid point, indeed. And I was just going to add that when it comes to referencing an ISO standard or any standard, just as a kind of a point of order, we have never referenced any standards inside the specification itself. The only place we've ever referenced a standard is in the definition section, where when we defined SBOM, we mentioned, for example, SPDX. So just to kind of note there that we've avoided referencing any standard inside the standard. The only place we've ever mentioned another standard is in the definitions.
Yeah, you can't. It is done on other ISO specifications, but they always say, for example, and you know, just refer to them without actually, you know, it's just giving them a hint. Here's another place you can go look. But for a closed specification, I don't think that would be worth putting in there at all.
A very good point from both of you. So, I mean, we could get around this, I guess, by simply saying that at this juncture, unless anyone objects on the call, we don't plan to reference closed specifications. This doesn't mean that people can't use one. You know, it could be very beneficial to use one in the context of whatever they're up to, but that's outside of the scope of what we're up to right here.
And then after this meeting, we open an issue inside OpenChain that actually we want a declaration that we cannot use enclosed documents on OpenChain. See, that's make it official in some points.
Yeah, if you can open that issue, that'd be great, and we can pull that into the next call. Yeah, well, that was a quick one. With that, we're actually done. Some really, really good stuff there going through that working group subcommittee 27 comments in from reviewer CERT. Chris and
guys,
Elliot,
thank you. I need to leave.
All right, thank you.
Have a nice evening for all of you. I need to leave the office.
Take care, man. Be well. Thank you again.
Goodbye.
As well, Chris, for fantastic notes and contributions that helped balance us out. Does anyone have anything else they want to do right now on the specs? If not, I will throw us to any other business. And I noticed that Nathan is on the line. Nathan, we've just scheduled another education call for the 9th of February at 9 a.m. Pacific. So that email is being arranged and going out literally this second. So on the 9th of February, 9 a.m. Pacific is the next education call. Do you want to say anything about it to help let people know what they'll find?
Yeah, no, thank you, Shane, for doing that. And we'll start getting the meetings farther out here in advance. But I think this time what we're going to hopefully do is make it more through the way of the FAQ. I'll try to get some things, questions more formally teed up and some more content to look at by Thursday. And Yeah, and I think the content that people have been bringing, I think one surprising thing for me is just how valuable, like just the feedback of, what's been useful to people. It turns out, a lot of these resources, people have been reusing internally. I know even at my company, we're, when we think about what we need to provide to third parties or partners, like going to these resources and these documents are kind of one of the first things we're starting to think about. And it's like a great kind of neutral way to get information. So I think, the work we're doing on polishing these things up is extremely valuable. And the feedback, if you have things that you want to see or, that have been valuable to you, it's really helpful to know that. So thank you all.
Great stuff. And again, the email just went to the lists with the calendar invite and updates. It's also in our global calendar. So Education Work Group will be working on that key reference material on the 9th of February at 9 a.m. Pacific. It will be the middle of night for us in Asia. So I will probably not be meeting you there, not least because I'll be on a plane on the way to the United States for a conference. But in the capable hands of Nathan, all will be more than well. Now, I noticed that we had a comment from the chat from Mary, just following up with another note on the security topic. So what I'm going to do is just say, Mary, thank you very much for the comment. It came in just a little bit late as we moved on to another topic. So what I'll do is I'm going to table the content of that comment for our follow-on discussion next time. With that, we're at any other business. If you have any business, let me know. If not, we'll be closing this meeting here and having a big congratulations for closing 3 important issues. Thank you, everyone. Please have a beautiful day. Please look after yourselves, and I'll see you at the next event.
Thank you, Shane.
Thanks, Shane.
Bye, guys.
Bye.